Hey friends, front-end web applications often call back-end APIs for data and services. Azure Static Web Apps provides built-in serverless API endpoints via integration with Azure services. Annina is here to show me how it works today on Azure Friday. Hey friends, I'm Scott Hanselman. It's Azure Friday. I'm here with Annina. She's a software engineer on Azure Static Web Apps. And, I'm a huge fan of Azure Static Web Apps. I got like, I don't know, 10 or 11 of them, but I think I'm just scratching the surface. I just have basic HTML and that's kind of it.
So what you basically do is you just host like a static web app, but you don't have like any API or anything, any authorization, any of the
Yeah.
code
I mean, I
bases
do a
we
little
provide.
Jekyll and I do a little GitHub Actions. I do have one that has a backend Azure function, but it's
Yeah,
anonymous and it's open to
yeah,
the public.
yeah. That's one of the backend options we provide, right? Like managed functions where we take care of deploying the code to the function app also from your code repository. And another feature that we've also provided until now is linking a function. So if you would want to like have your function code separately, you could like host that function and then link it. So
Okay.
now what though, if you would have already like a Node.js API or something, right? And you would just like want to host it as a web app or like a container app if you want to be a bit more fancy. How would you do that now?
I would probably start wondering like about what I'm allowed to do because I know that JavaScript can call back to the origin server and I could organize
Yeah,
cores, but sometimes I want to call,
yeah,
websites and APIs I don't have control over. So then I would probably get
exactly.
confused.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of things that you need to think about when you do that, right? You almost need to become like a whole auth engineer to implement and like connect this front end to the back end. And this is where the new feature comes in. What we basically allow you now is not only to bring your function app, but also bring many other backend services. And what we do then when you link a backend service to your static web app is we secure the backend so
Mhm.
that only the static web app will now have access. We handle cores, obviously. And in addition, you can also use the authentication from the front end now from the static web app, you can now use on the backend side, and you can extract the user details from the header that we actually attach to every request. So you basically can create this like fully end-to-end authenticated apps without any auth implementation, which I think is pretty awesome.
And that means a minimal back end. I mean, the back end is the service of Azure Static Web Apps. You're hiding that complexity from me as a back end engineer.
You Yeah, I mean, what you would do is you would just like host your own backend service with your own backend logic, right? You
Right.
would like deploy it to like a container app, and then you
Right.
would have like a static web app. And now you would want the static web app though to like connect to the container app without like handling authentication cores and also routing, which is also part, right? You somehow need to route from the static web app to the backend now.
Okay. So does that mean, and I want to make sure I understand because this is important
Mhm.
because you know this more
Yeah,
than I do.
totally.
I would right now I'm writing my backend kind of like open and public. There's no
Oh, yeah,
code in my backend that's worrying about that. So
exactly.
that is being handled by the
Fully.
exactly. All right. Cool.
Exactly. I think that will become a lot clearer if we just like dive into a demo. I
Let's do it.
think you will be, yeah, it will be a bit more visible what exactly is happening. So now imagine we have this very, very simple code deployed to a static web app.
Mhm.
Okay. What you can see here is we just have like a tag that says hello, and then we append something to it, right? And what we append to it is whatever gets returned at this route here, right?
Mhm.
Now, currently, when we open the site, it just says hello because we don't have any like files exposed at that route. We currently don't handle this call really. Okay.
So that right
So
now,
now,
that's a backend route, just to make sure I understand. You're going to be going to
well,
Annina.AzureStaticWebApp/API, or this is
uh, yeah, exactly. That would be basically an internal call to like the default host name of the static web app,
there you go.
right?
Okay.
But currently, there's nothing that gets returned there, and that's why it's just empty.
Okay, cool.
Now, let's imagine now in addition, you created like a simple Node.js API that exposes specifically an endpoint at that similar path, that same path.
Mhm.
Okay. And what this API returns, it for now, ignore whatever's happening in the middle.
Mhm.
This API simply returns this text: stranger, please log in. Now, how do we connect those two? How do we now ensure that this static web app, this fetch call, is actually going to the container app and calling that endpoint that we expose in the container? Very simple. Yeah, you have a question?
No, I'm just absorbing. I'm wondering how it's going to happen.
Oh, wait for it. So the only thing we do now is we go here to Static Web Apps, to the static web app that we have deployed. We go to the APIs tab, and then we simply link the container app to the static web app. Okay?
Mm.
And what happens now is that we take care of adding auth to the container app, routing any requests that come to the static web app containing the API context actually to the backend server. So now when we go back here and we refresh, we can actually see the text that gets returned from the container app.
You said API context. Was that the path, the actual URL /
Oh,
API, or is that some
yeah.
hidden header I'm not seeing?
No, it's just the path.
That's the
Basically
magic.
just
It's API
That's the
/
magic. Exactly. You just need to
Oh.
add that path, and you need to have a backend link to a static web app. And now any request to that static web app that starts with the API prefix will
Okay.
actually get routed to the backend.
Okay, this is a little nit, but is the container app or function or whatever
Mhm,
listening
mhm.
for /user details at the root, or is it listening for /API /user details?
API/user details.
Okay.
That's actually a very, very good question. Yeah.
I
So
like it when I ask good questions.
the paths actually need to match.
Okay.
So we're exposing API user details here, and we're
Okay.
calling exactly that endpoint on the static web app, right? Now, this might be like good already in some scenarios, but what we would actually want is we would want to like identify the end user, right? So now what we can do is we can use the authentication authorization feature from Static Web Apps to log in. This is the out of the box authorization. And now what you can see is we actually return my user details. So now let's look again into the API, what is actually happening on the backend side. So what we do here is, as you can see, the API is trying to extract details from the header XMS client principal. And this is a header that we now attach to every request from static web app to container app. And what we can do now is we can trust this header and we can actually extract user details from it. And then we can, like in a real life scenario, we would probably use that to persist this in a database with some additional details or do whatever with it. But we can basically now use this and trust this header and so identify whomever is logged in on the front end side. And this context will also contain a user ID and a provider so that we don't need to use the email address or something to identify our end user.
Okay. Were you already logged in?
I just logged in. Did you miss it?
I think I missed it. It was so fast. So
Yeah.
X-MS client principal and/or -name and/or -ID are in that request and available to be pulled out because you're already logged in for that.
Because, yeah.
Okay,
I
for
logged
that
in the
domain.
front end. So what basically happens is we have authorization out of the box, right? Which means that we have those login and logout endpoints with pre-provisioned, pre-configured identity providers like Azure Active Directory and GitHub and Google, etc. And now you can just use these endpoints to log in using one of those providers. And then what we do is we take the user details and the auth context and we add it to the browser. And from now on, any request from the static web app to the container app will actually contain this header, which we can now use on the backend side to identify the end user. And all that with like no auth implementation.
Now, I seem to remember, I don't know if it's in the old days or if it's new, that there was also a hidden endpoint /.auth/me within Azure Static Web Apps.
Exactly. Very nice. And this is where we can see all the user details now. That's my user ID. I'm currently logged in with AAD, and that's my email address.
Okay,
and we also have user roles, right? That can then be used to restrict access to different paths.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And this will work for an MSA, a Microsoft account, a public Microsoft account, or an Azure Active Directory, right? Any Microsoft principal.
Or even like a Twitter account or Google. We basically have this pre-configured identity providers for multiple providers. We can also log in using Google or Twitter or many more.
And it'll
And you
still
can
show
also
up
bring your
here at
own
auth.
identity provider.
It'll
Exactly.
Okay, cool. So you're populating
Exactly.
XMS client principal with any OAuth provider.
With the OAuth providers that we have configured, or you can also bring your own and configure it yourself.
That's brilliant. I love it. All right. See, now the wheels
You
are
like it?
turning about how I'm going to implement this on my own Azure Static Web Apps.
You should. Okay, so now this is like a very simple scenario, but I think this is already extremely powerful, right? Like any normal platform, you can already use this now to build your end-to-end authenticated app, right? So what I want to demo now, though, is like an app where we actually combine this with a new feature from API Management. Should we do that?
Let's do it.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start with this. Just ignore whatever we have here right now.
All right.
Okay, so imagine you have like a product and you use GitHub issues to collect feedback and to collect bugs or whatever. And now the problem is with that, though, that only users that actually have a GitHub account are actually able to create those GitHub issues, right? What we want to do now is we want to build a very simple app that actually allows our customer to log in using Azure Active Directory and still create those GitHub issues.
Would they be doing it as themselves, or would you be doing it on behalf of them as your own identity?
We would what we would do is we would configure an OAuth app that would then basically be the identity assigned to the AAD user, right? Because we can't use the AAD user to actually post issues to GitHub. The GitHub APIs won't allow that, right?
So if you and I both did that, it would look like the same app. It looks like a bot.
But there's a trick to it that we will come to in a second.
All right.
Very good that you think of that, though. Nice. Okay, so let's say we have a static web app again, okay? And the only thing that static web app does is it has like a login button. This button, again, the only thing it does is it redirects to the login endpoint, which you missed before. So now you can see what actually happens. Like we get forwarded to the auth endpoint, and now we're actually logged in using my AAD account again. Okay?
I gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. And so what I have here now is like a very simple form, right? I just have like a title and a description and a button that says post to GitHub. Now, I cannot just post an issue to GitHub from the browser now. Why that is because the AAD user, like GitHub is not aware of it, right? Like GitHub doesn't know who the AAD user is.
Right.
So what we need to actually post that issue is we'll need some like instance in between, right? We'll need some instance that can be configured with an OAuth GitHub app that will be the actual identity that we will then use to post the GitHub issue, and that can handle the tokens and attach the token to the through-coming request.
Right, an identity proxy.
Exactly. And so what we use for this is one of the new backend services that we allow now to be linked to a static web app is actually API Management. So we have this API Management instance here, and what we did here is we configured the OAuth app, like an OAuth app that I previously created. It's very simple. You just go to GitHub, you create an OAuth app, right? It gets created on your identity. So any access you have, the OAuth app will now have too. And then we configure it here with a certain scope. So now what APIM does is they have like a managed token store. So APIM will take care of refreshing and encrypting that token for you. Another bit of magic here. And what we can do now is we can actually use this OAuth app to sign requests that come through. So what we do to do that is we have an API configured here, which is simply the GitHub Issues API, right? So it comes into APIM and we basically forward it to GitHub Issues, the post endpoint, to this repository here, as you can see. Okay. And now when we link this APIM instance to our static web app and send a request, again, I can show the code real quick, to this path here, which is
It's so
the
simple.
path of our API management instance,
Mhm.
the request will actually go to the API management endpoint, and then we can do something there with it, and then we can forward it to GitHub. And what we do there is we use this configured OAuth app that we configured before to actually attach an authorization header. And like that, the request will be authenticated to GitHub. Now, you mentioned, though, that, oh, damn, then it's like the same app posting over and over again. So what we can actually do in addition is we have full control over this request coming through to through APIM, right? And so what we can do in addition is we can actually, again, access the XMS client principal header that gets sent again from the static web app to the API management instance. And then we can do something with this. And what I, in this case, decided to do with it is I just appended a text to the body that says this GitHub issue was posted by my email address. And I actually even also added the body to post tags, which then specify in addition, this was an AAD user that actually posted the GitHub issue. So let's just try this out, right? Happy Friday, okay? Hello from the Azure Friday. And hit post to GitHub. And again.
Pressure's on.
Demo.
Oh, there it was.
There you go. Okay. Okay.
Down.
Perfect.
We'll probably end up
My
with 2
goosebumps there for a
issues then.
second.
We'll have 2 issues.
Okay, perfect. And now we can go to the issues and refresh that page. So this is the repository we're actually posting it to. And here
2 issues.
we have the new issue. And as you can see, there are like multiple tags: AAD user, authenticated bug. Those are just like the 3 tags I add
Right.
when I threw that policy in API management. And in addition, I appended this text here, which basically specifies who actually created this issue.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
It's so simple. It's just very elegant and simple. I wonder if it would ever be possible to have it look like, if it would probably require work on the GitHub side to post on behalf of someone. So the AAD users,
totally.
which currently appears as a little pixel icon there, you would
course,
basically say issue created by, and it would say, oh, that's a GitHub user I know about, and then say this bot did this on Annina's behalf. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. This is currently not in our power, right? The only thing we can do is basically use this pre-configured OAuth app and then just like append as much details as we have to the issue.
That's great. That's so cool. And so little code. It really, APIM is hiding a lot from us, but even what it's hiding is quite simple and elegant.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole point, right? Not having to deal with all the different configurations and all the different code you would have to implement if you would handle it on your own, right? Especially in such a complex scenario where you have like multiple identities that you would need to handle, right?
Yeah. Gosh, this is
Hope you like
it. When I know that it's a good episode of Azure Friday, it's when I start going, okay, which of my apps am I going to do this with, and how am I going to?
What can I build with it?
Right, it's a good talk. It's a good talk when you can go immediately and put it into practice. This has been great. So, where in the docs can we go and learn more about this API?
Yeah.
Where can we learn more about this?
Okay, so we have different documentation because they're different features, right? One option is, of course, go to like our static web apps documentation where we talk about the new feature. So this is overview of API support in Azure Static Web Apps, where there are all the different backends listed. And then on top of this, we will also be releasing a blog article with some like more details about that specific APIM scenario also. If you're like interested in seeing like the job policy, because you actually need to do some like configuration, obviously in the inbound policy, right? To just set the header and to do this like custom body editing. But this will all be in a blog article, and we'll also have that in examples. But yeah, here you can see all the different backend options we provide: API management, app service, and also container apps, and obviously Azure Functions. So all the great PaaS services really that you need.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for spending time with me today.
Yeah, thank you. That was awesome.
I've been learning all about how to integrate APIs into static web apps today on Azure Friday. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Azure Friday. Now I need you to like it, comment on it, tell your friends, retweet it. Watch more Azure Friday.